Hey, what's up you guys? It's Zach with PCBros, and today I'm going to show you how to build your first budget gaming PC. This time, you're going to follow along with me in first person. But before we go over each of these specs right here, I'm going to go over all the tools you're going to need. First up, you're obviously going to need a Phillips screwdriver. I'd get a smaller one as well for those M.2 screws. Then you are going to need this for the standoffs, some wire cutters, and a box cutter to open all the boxes. Oh yeah, almost forgot, you're going to need plenty of zip ties. Now I'm going to go over each of the specs of this budget build that I chose and some things to point out so when you're following along you can do it as closely as possible. For the most part, these specs are going to be pretty close to almost any budget PC that we would do. So first up, for the CPU, we're rocking the Intel i3 12100F, a very good budget starter CPU. And then the co-star of the show here, we have the GTX 1650. This is the MSI Ventus XS. This is a pretty good one. To power all of this, we have the MAG A650BN 80 plus bronze. The motherboard, we're rocking a B660M Pro RS. For storage, we got 16 gigs of DDR4 3200 megahertz RAM. We got a 512 gigabyte NVMe. And all of this will be housed in a nice Apivia Prodigy. The first step I like to do when building a gaming PC is prepping the case. So we're going to need the box cutter, open the case up. And when you flip the case over, you want to make sure you're holding the top so it doesn't fall out. And then that way you can just pull it right up. Now I wouldn't touch this yet. You could probably hear the static. I like to ground it with something metal. Trying to get as much of that static out as possible. Maybe touch it with my elbow. Ooh, that's shocked. There will be a lot of static buildup. You want to keep these, and I would keep this as well. All right, so now we have the case out. We're going to prep it for the motherboard. So we are going to take both side panels off. Usually they'll have screws on the side here, and then the front will have 4 screws. We will keep these to the side for later. Once you have both of the panels off, we are going to reorientate this fan, because right now the cables are coming from the bottom, which if you see here, it will give this kind of ugly cross section. We want this to go straight through the top and then through this hole here, just making cable management a little bit cleaner. So we're gonna take that Phillips screwdriver, unscrew each of these screws. Okay, I have all the screws off. We're going to take this fan, just turn it once, and now that cord should be going through just straight to the top here. And then we're going to screw all the screws back on. Fan's back on and we're looking good. Usually on cases, they'll keep a little supply bag in the back. Sometimes they'll be on the bottom. Just look out for a little supply bag. This will have screws in it and stuff like that. And now this case is all ready for the motherboard. So we're just going to put it to the side. And now we're going to get the motherboard ready. So we have our motherboard. Take out the IO shield. We'll put that right next to the case for later. We got the screws. This is the SATA. If you're rocking a SATA SSD, I'll show you what to do with that later. And then we have the motherboard here. Pull out the motherboard while keeping the little foam on the bottom, laying it flat carefully. And now we're going to add our CPU, our RAM, and then the storage. You can do this in whatever order you want. I like to start with the CPU. Get the box cutter out. Now for this budget PC build, we're just rocking the stock Intel cooler, which should be plenty enough to cool the CPU. If you have a tower cooler though, then here's another video that you can check out on how to install tower coolers that I did earlier, and then come back to here after you've done that. If you have an AMD CPU, this step will be very similar. It's just going to look a little bit different. You are going to carefully hold on to the CPU, one finger on each side, never touching that bottom, and then push down and release the lever, opening up the socket here. There will be an arrow, usually on the silver, and an arrow on the CPU. You want to match both of those up. That's where you know which way your CPU is going. We're going to close the lid, apply a little bit of pressure as we pull down and get that hook back in. This will sometimes pop out, or sometimes you have to finish it and pull it out. But now we have a installed CPU. Cooler for Intel is very easy. We just want to line up each of these with the holes, apply a little pressure. The thermal paste is already on it. Make sure your cable can reach the CPU plug. I like to make sure all of these are in place before fully pushing them down. Cool, so now I can feel that they're ready to go. You're going to take 2 thumbs, push it down till you hear a click. You should hear a click on all 4. That's when you know it is safely in. And then you were going to plug this into the CPU fan. It should be labeled here. And then I like to tuck this into the side a little bit. You should be able to hold the motherboard with the CPU cooler. You don't want to over test this, but just to make sure it's fully on here. Next up, I'm going to install my RAM. Before installing the RAM, there's going to be some latches. You want to press those down. Sometimes they'll be on both sides, depending on what motherboard you have. The RAM can only go one way, so pay attention where the notch is on the RAM. You want to line it up with the notch on the socket. With 2 fingers, you're going to push down till you hear a click on both sides. Now I have put the RAM in these 2 slots for a reason. You want the RAM going in every other slot if you only have 2 sticks. Last thing for the motherboard, we have the NVMe. If you have an SSD instead, here's another video I did on how to install an SSD. Watch that one and then come back to this for the rest of the build. Now on the motherboard, you want to, if your motherboard supports, go into the one with the armor plate on it. This is where you will need the smaller Phillips. Unscrew both sides. And under this will be a protective film that we'll remove. All right, here's the protective film. We're going to peel that off, put that in, press it down, and then put the plate back on. It lines in with both the holes there. We are going to take the screws and screw them back in. And now you're ready to put the motherboard in the case. I have laid the case flat before we put the motherboard in. We're going to take the I/O shield. If your motherboard has a built-in I/O shield, you can just skip this part. We're going to bend whatever the metal things that could get in our way. We're just going to bend them back a little bit. We're going to make sure the orientation is right. And we're going to line it up, starting on the inside of the PC. And we're going to push until it clicks in. It should stay in. Your motherboard is going to have holes matching up with the standoffs. This one is missing 2 standoffs, which I'm going to add to the case here. These should come into the packet that came with the case. And then you're just going to screw them in as you need them. They will be these screws right here. Now you should have a standoff for each of the holes on the motherboard. We are going to carefully place and line up the motherboard for all those standoffs. And it should fit nicely into that I/O shield as well. And once we've screwed in all the screws for those holes, this motherboard should be locked in place and ready to go. So that will be the next step. So now we're going to take these screws and screw them into each of the holes of the motherboard where it lines off with the standoffs. These should go in easily and smoothly. Once you get the first couple screws in, the rest should be extremely easy and lined up correctly. All right, now that that's done, we're headed to the next step. We are going to plug in all the cords from the case into their respective spots. So let's take a look back here. I'll run through one by one what each is and where it goes. You can plug them in any order. This is the USB 3. This goes right through this first hole here. Usually it'll be somewhere over here, and it will plug in on the other side. The plug will look like this. It'll be labeled as well. All of these will be labeled as well. Sometimes it will be on the bottom, and in that case, you want to always go with the hole that's closest to the plug. So we will plug that in. You should hear a click on most of these that you plug in. Next up, we got the USB. We're going to funnel this one through the bottom. Almost all of the motherboards will have this on the bottom, and the USBs are sometimes in a little casing like this. You'll have 2, sometimes more. You can plug it in any one that says USB, and these can only plug in one way, so you don't really need to worry about plugging in wrong. And then there's one that looks very close, very similar. This is the HD audio. This will almost always be on the bottom left here. And again, this one will only be able to go one way. So don't worry about messing it up. Once it's fastened in there, you know you did it right. And now we have the whole front panel. If you have one that says LED switch, that does not belong here, and we'll just move that one back. I'll show you what to do with that one later, so this one might not even apply to you. So we're going to take all of these, funnel them through the bottom as well. Now the front panel will pretty much always be on the bottom right. And if you're not sure that you have the right one, it should say panel next to it, and then it will show on the bottom, which I'll have a graph up here because you probably can't see that, but it'll show where each of these go. So I'll have a graph to help with that. But I like to start with bottom left and work my way up. So you are looking for HD LED. We're going to plug that in, bottom left, and then move to the bottom right. Once that's plugged in, you want to make sure you're plugging it into the right two. All of these are going to be close together. Next to the HD LED, we got the reset. We're going to plug that right next to it. It's going to be snug next to each other. And then on the top left, we have positive and negative LED here, plus, minus. You want to make sure it goes in that order, plus, minus, and they should fit right next to each other. And then the last one that goes next to the plus, minus is the power switch. That'll plug in right next to it. And all of these should be nice and snug together on that front panel. We're just going to pull the excess, make it look tight. And now we have plugged in everything from the case to the motherboard. We're going to flip it back around. And now we have a cable mess, which we will work on before we plug in the power supply. Now we're on everyone's least favorite step, which is cable managing. With cable management, a lot of it is just preference too. There's no really right or wrong way to do it. I mean, you can just shove these cables and then close it if you want, but we like to do some cable management here. For one, it makes it look cleaner. It makes it easier if you want to upgrade in the future. So your case is going to have little hooks all throughout. This is where you're going to put zip ties and keep all of the cables tight. The goal of cable management is you want as little cable showing in the front as possible. So you want to hide them in between here. You don't really want it to be in front of those holes because then you could see it from the front. You want the cables to be out of the way and out of sight, basically. So I'm going to take a zip tie, go on the top here, and just start keeping all of these together. We're just going to go down the line with zip ties and make this pretty much one singular cable. And we're going to keep it out of the way of those holes, so in the front you can't see it at all. So just go through. Again, there's no real wrong way to do it. Just do it use as many zip ties as you really want. When you think about cable management that way, there's no real wrong way to do it. Then you can have some fun with it. Get creative. Do it how you would like to see your PC. I like to snip as I go. I don't know. And then to keep this little bundle of cables in place, I'm going to zip tie on this convenient little spot here. And now this whole thing is out of sight and together. And now we have this mess at the bottom, which sometimes cable managing can be hard depending on the case you have too, because it won't really give you a lot of options for managing. If there's not much you can do, just do the best you can. Right here is where the CPU cable is going to go. This is a good point for me to put the power supply in, so then we can get the rest of the cables. There's still some cables that go along with the power supply. Now that we have it a little bit cleaned up, it should be easier to organize the rest from here on out. So let's get the power supply. Put the power supply in, fan facing down, and then we just slide it right in and make sure it is lined up here in the back. Usually your power supply will come with the power supply screws, the right ones that you need. And then we're gonna take each of the screws and lock that power supply in place. The power supply is now in place. There are some things we're going to have to plug in the motherboard from the power supply. We have this 24-pin connector. This is the first thing I like to plug in. I like to make sure I'm under all of the cables and on the very back layer of the cables to keep it all nice and clean. We're just gonna go through this top hole. Most 12-pin connectors will be on the top here. And with this notch facing out, we are going to wiggle until you hear that click. You might need to push in pretty hard on this one. It can be a little bit tricky. Now we come back to this side. We're going to go ahead and tuck in that excess and zip tie. The next thing that we are going to find is the CPU connector. It should say it on the side here. And we are going to take that one. We'll move everything else to the side. And this will go in the top right. It will pretty much always go on the top right. We're going to flip around the notch facing up, and this should pretty much only go one way. Now we've got that one in place. We're going to take what we had from the case and now the CPU, and we're going to put those together and zip tie them on whatever the top hook is next to it. And then I will do another one just to make sure it's all one, and on this hook below. And now I have the CPU in, the 24 pin. This is the fan hub. This is the LED switch. That matches up from the one that we had earlier. And you will see there's 2 pins on one side here. You want to connect the LED switch with those 2 pins. So it should be a little off center. Your case might do something a little bit different, like Molex or something like that. But generally, whatever you have is probably going to need a SATA connector. Your power supply should also have. I mean, this one's got a lot to choose from here. You can plug it in to any. You might also have something that looks like this. That's for like older cases. So I'm just going to plug in whatever SATA I can get my hands on, and it'll plug in right here. For a power supply like this, you're gonna have lots of excess cables because I will not need any of the other SATA. So I'm just going to shove this into the basement right here and out of the way. And I want to keep the cable that says PCIe. This is going to be what we plug into the GPU if your GPU has this plug. Going to do some more cable tucking here, and now we should be just about ready for the GPU. So we have the GPU here, and we're going to check. We're going to check how many or if any of the PCIe cables we're going to need. Looks like this one just has the 6 pin. To prep the GPU, sometimes there's going to be a peel off. Most of the time you're going to see a protector, and there'll be protectors on the display ports. I'll just leave those on. We're just gonna make sure we get the one that matches up here. Looks like this one fits. And we're going to put that through the basement and through this front hole here. And now this is ready for the GPU. So before we put the GPU in, we are going to get the slots ready. Most of the time, this top one is going to be one that you unscrew. This is where the GPU will go. Keep that screwed to the side. And I know I want to put it in this slot right here, this top one. This is the only one that we really can. So this is going to require 2 lanes, 1 and then 2. So I'm going to need this lane right below it as well. So this one is one that you actually just pop out. There's no screws. Now before installing the GPU, make sure you push that in. We're going to gently line it up with the lanes, as well as making sure it is in the slot. We're going to push gently until you hear a click, and then take that screw from before, and we're going to screw that into the top. Be careful when screwing the screw in, because if you screw in too much, the GPU will actually come up a little bit. And you don't want that. For one, the ports, you won't be able to go back in. You see, mine has actually gone up a little bit. So I want to unscrew just a little bit so I can take these out. Last thing, you're going to plug in that PCIe cable. Should hear a click on that one as well. We're going to put the back panel back on. And the last thing we have to do here is plug it in and make sure it turns on. That's a good sign. We want to make sure that the RGB works as well. And this is a successful build. Congratulations, you just built your first gaming PC. Now, if you want to learn how to install and activate Windows, check out this video here. The link will be down below as well as the other ones. Check that out after you've made sure your PC works and turns on. Then you just have to install Windows and drivers, and then you're ready to play.